What's up, agency owners? Jason Swenk here with another episode of the Smart Agency Masterclass, a podcast for the agency owner that wants to scale faster. And on today's episode, I have an amazing agency owner where we're going to talk about the 4 reasons most digital agencies do not scale. And so let's go ahead and jump into the show. Hey, Wayne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm excited for our chat today.
Yeah, man. Well, before we jump into the 4 reasons most people don't scale their digital agency, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Absolutely. So I am the founder of I guess you call it boutique agency, Ugly Mug Marketing. We've been in business just over 14 years now. And, it's been an adventurous 14 years to say the least, and so many lessons, so many mistakes I've made along the way. And honestly, I would say that I wish there had been a podcast like yours back in the early days that was geared towards agency owners, because it would have saved me so much time, so much frustration and heartache, I guess.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's kind of why we created this 8 years ago. Is like, I wanted to create a resource I wish I had. So, but now you have it. Well, my first question for you is not why did you start your agency? How did you come up with the name?
Yeah, perfect. So the name actually comes from a quote by this gentleman of the name David Ogilvy. So Ogilvy and Mather, a lot of listeners are probably familiar with them. So David had this quote inside his agency, which was, "I would rather you show me an ad that's ugly and effective over one that's beautiful but isn't." And so for me, from the very early days, I wanted that to be our North Star. I didn't want to get distracted, as so often we can do in the world. We can be distracted by the awards and by all the accolades from, people within the industries or publications. And when, at least for me, when I think we begin focusing on those things, we lose sight of what matters most. And the reason that many of us start our agencies is to serve others and help them get results. So that's where it comes from.
I love that. I was trying to figure out, like, beforehand, I was like, Ugly Mug. I was like, these guys are all good looking. I was like, I'm not getting it, but I do agree with you. And I think we have the same philosophy. So this is going to be a really good episode of, I'd rather something be effective than look good. I could care less about awards. I could care less about the vanity metrics. It's all about results. And I think you have that on your website. When I was looking through it, it's like, what makes us different is like results. So let's go ahead and jump into kind of what are some reasons why, or what were some reasons back in the day you weren't scaling?
The number one reason for me personally that we didn't scale, well, let me begin by saying this, Jason. I think so often that people don't understand the difference between growth and scale. Right now, scale is kind of the buzzword, right? It's the buzzword across businesses, across the entrepreneurial world. It's like, if you're not scaling, what are you doing? Well, for me, over time, what I've learned is that the difference between scale and growth is this, that when you actually scale your business, you as the founder, you as the leader of the organization, your time becomes more and more free. You are able to work in the areas and on the areas that you choose to work in and work on. In other words, you're able to work within your gifts. Whereas if you're merely growing, as you grow, your time becomes more and more constrained. You get stuck doing more and more of the things that you may hate doing. And so I believe this understanding, first and foremost, is important, that in order to scale, you have to have the systems, you have to have the processes, and you have to have the right mindset. So that's, I guess, a foundational piece before we dive into my thoughts on it.
No, I mean, I totally agree with that. I was chatting with someone yesterday, and they were around the 15 person mark. And I go, well, what's the end goal? He's like, well, I don't want to grow into a big agency. I was like, why not? He goes, well, I'm already maxed out. I'm like, oh, you're still growing. You're not ready to scale yet.
Yep. No, that's it. And I think, so for me, number one, the number one reason I think we don't scale, it goes back to our mindset as the agency owner. So for me, in the early days, it was a lot about ego. It was a lot about me being the hero. So I got to step in, I got to save the day. I got to come up with the creative ideas or the campaign that saved the day. And when we have that mindset, it's good initially, right? As we get off the ground, it's great to have that mindset and that belief in ourselves and the ability to jump in and save the day. But as we begin growing and as we begin scaling, that very thing that served us so well in the early days now becomes a stumbling block or hindrance on our path to scale. So, number one is we have to begin shifting our mindset. We have to understand that as we grow our agencies, we as leaders become the cap or the lid to the growth of our agency.
I released a video this morning about how we went from $1 million to $25 million in less than 2 years. And the first thing was around, you have to have a vision for where you're going, right? I always joke with people, I'm like, you're on a boat and your whole team member's on a boat, but you don't tell them where you're going. And then you get tired after about 10 hours of driving and you're like, wake me up whenever the boat changes course. And the boat changes courses like every second. And so they're waking you up. But if you just came up with the vision, you knew where you were going. So if I was going from New York to London, I could just tell them, hey, make sure the course is on from New York to London. Like, you guys make the decision rather than having everything funnel. So I always looked at it of, I need to know where I'm going and then communicate that to the team so then they can make better decisions for the agency rather than better decisions for themselves. Do you agree?
100%. Absolutely. I know for me, for so long, I didn't understand the difference between implicit and explicit communication. So in other words, I assumed that everyone understood where we were trying to go and what we were trying to accomplish because it was natural to me. Like, the vision was so clear in my head. But what I didn't realize is if you don't explicitly explain those things, if you don't paint the picture or create, as Cameron Herold would call it, the vivid vision of where you're trying to get to, they don't see it. They don't understand it. They're not in your head. And where we get in trouble is we assume that they do. And then we end up frustrated at them because they're going the wrong direction. And we're like, how do you not understand this? When in reality, we haven't explained it the way we should.
So what's number 2 of why people don't? Did we just cover it, or is there something else?
It's a subtle nuance in there, and it's this idea that you can't scale hustle. And so what I learned in my own journey is that as the agency began growing and as we began kind of breaking through certain levels, through certain revenue figures or number of employees, number of clients, whatever it may be, that there's this natural mentality for so many that if I work just a little bit harder, if I push just a little bit more, I'll get to that next level where I can then relax or take it a little easier. And the problem is that day never arrives. That day never gets here unless you understand this idea that you can never hustle your way to scale, right? You can never do that. That is where systems and processes come into play. And so that is the second part is you have to break away and you have to understand the importance of documenting all the systems and processes that are necessary. And what I can say is that for me personally, as a highly creative, visionary type of person, and I know so many other agency owners are that same way, that the taking the time, what are the systems, what are the processes, what are all these things that we need? It can feel like dragging our fingers across a chalkboard, right? It's the last thing we want to do. There's so many other quote unquote important things we should be doing. But at the end of the day, you're never going to get to that next level without those in place.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, there's certain people out there that I respect highly that always talk about hustle, but that works for them. I've always been the mentality of going, I don't want to be that old person, and I'm not. That's why I take off so much time and we only work like 10 hours a week. I don't want to be that old person that has a ton of money. Now I can go do some cool stuff. I want to be still young. I'm not, is 45 still young? I'm still 20, right? I want to be able to go experience and go do all these amazing things. And that's what I want for everyone listening and everyone out there. I don't want you to work all the time and then at 65, sell your agency, have some money, but now you really can't do as much anymore. Like that was always my biggest fear of how can I create a vision? How can I create the right systems, hire the right team where I can go take time off And that's what we did at the agency, and that's what we're doing now, and that's why we do what we do. So what is number 3?
So number 3, you've already brought this up, but it is understanding the difference between alignment and autonomy. And so if you think about like a 4-quadrant matrix here, on one side we have alignment, and we can either have little alignment or we can have high alignment. And on the other axes of this matrix, we have autonomy. So no autonomy. In other words, people aren't free to do things on their own. Everything is controlled. We tell them exactly what to do. On the other end of that spectrum, high autonomy. They can make decisions on their own. They can execute on their own. And in order to actually scale an agency, you have to have balance in these two things. So in other words, if you have high alignment, in other words, everyone's aligned around the vision, but you don't give them autonomy, you've just created robots that are waiting on your orders to do the exact next thing. The flip side of that is if we have tremendous autonomy, but we have no alignment, we have chaos. We have people running around doing what they think is best. And we're frustrated because they're doing all these things. They're frustrated because they're doing all these things and they're thinking, I'm doing this great job. I'm using my skills and my abilities to help grow, help achieve client results. And yet we're not in alignment. So in order to truly scale, you have to have high alignment, which is what you mentioned earlier, kind of the boat or making the trip. And then also we need team members who we can trust, who we can give a lot of autonomy to, so that they're able to go execute without our constant need or desire to watch over their shoulders every single thing they do.
Yeah, I always look at it as and I think there's a lot of people that don't have this, and I treat them as kind of agency toll booth owners, where you have 20 different lanes, but you're pushing all the cars into one lane, and you have to approve every single car. And that's pretty frustrating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's that old adage that you can have growth or you can have control, but you can't have both.
Ooh, I like that. Say that again.
You can have growth or you can have control, but you can't have both.
Yeah, I like that. I'm stealing that one. That's really good. I love that. I'm a big fan
I'm sure
of.
I stole it from somebody else.
I know. I went to Florida State, and so I'm a huge Deion Sanders fan. I've been following him on social for him going to Colorado, and I always he comes up with things like that, and then he's like, "Ooh, that's good. Like, write that down." That was like my Deion Sanders moment with that. Oh, I like it.
There you go.
Now I got to just remember it. Cool. And what's the last one?
The last one is this, that I call these the 4 growth rings. So if you think of 4 concentric circles stacked up on top of each other, so not horizontally, but they're vertical. On the very bottom is when you're stagnant. The ring above that is order. The ring above that is complexity. And the ring above that is chaos. The faster you are growing or the faster you are scaling your business, the more it's going to feel like you're up in the chaos. The slower your growth, the slower your scale, the more it's going to feel stagnant. And so here's the thing, that complexity is always a byproduct of growth. Things that are growing they create some complexity around it, right? So when you go from 2 team members to 7 team members, there's some complexity that's naturally created around that. Or when you go from 10 clients to 20 clients, there's complexity. Same thing with your accounting system. I mean, any system, any process in your business, that is always true. But sometimes our tendency in our agencies when we're growing them is, as we begin speeding up that process, we begin to feel like things are out of control because we haven't taken the time, back to number 2, to create the systems and the processes that should be in place. And so we become, again, the throttle or the lid on the ability to scale our agency or the ability to grow our agency. Because as it begins feeling chaotic, what do? We naturally begin pulling things back. And when we do that, we're sabotaging the future growth. And we keep going through these cycles. I see it over and over where we start to feel chaotic. We start to feel, things are overly complex. So we pull back the reins, and we never fix the true root cause of the problem, which are those systems and processes we talked about earlier. So I think it's important to understand that you're gonna feel those things. Even with systems and processes in place, you're gonna feel those things. And the systems and processes that are in place as you scale over time are gonna break. They're gonna show weaknesses because the systems that were initially designed for maybe a team of 5, and now you've got 10. So it's important just to understand those feelings, because I think sometimes if we're not careful, we become our own worst enemies.
There's no one listening that feels this way. Like there's everyone that feels this way. And I see it all the time. It's what I call the uncertainty line. It's the ups and downs. It's like, oh no, we clients, we have to sell a bunch. Then we get a bunch of clients, and then we're like, oh, we have to deliver. We got to stop selling. And you're just constantly up and down. You're on this roller coaster line. And I totally agree with you. The only way through it is creating the right systems. It's kind of like that agency owner I was chatting with yesterday. It's like, no, I don't want to grow to 100 because I'm already kind of, just going absolute crazy. But I tell people a lot of times, if you're around the 2 million mark to about the 7-8 million mark, you're kind of in no man's land. and if you can get over that, it actually starts freeing your time, and it's way more, you got more freedom, you're building wealth, you've created an asset rather than this agency burden that I always talk about. So this has all been amazing. Yeah.
Just curious, Jason, what do you see? So I completely agree with that, kind of those ranges. What other ranges do you see? So like for me, getting to that first million was like, there was this magic thing that was holding us back. Like I didn't know what it was or how to get there. Do you see those in other I guess revenue ranges as well?
So if you're around the 250 mark to the million, it's almost the same feeling from about the 2 to 8 million mark. Cause you're like, you can get to 250 really easy all by yourself and maybe with one other person. But then when you wanting to scale up to the million, you have to hire more people. And these are sliding scales too. Some people feel the pain at 2 million. That's the pain part, and then trying to get over. But it really depends on the team and yourself of what that cap is. Everyone has that glass ceiling that's a little bit different, right? I remember at my agency, it was around the 2 million mark that I felt like I hit that glass ceiling. And then when I could break through, I was like, oh, this is so much more freeing. Other people, it's 3, that's 1. It's all across. But whenever you do feel the pressure that you were just talking about, Wayne, it's kind of like Tony Robbins always says, like when you feel overwhelmed, right? It's a key indication that you're ranking things too highly. Like you have too many things to do. So just think about one thing. And I look at it as when you hit this, it's kind of the same thing. Like you're trying to do too much. How do we get that focus? How do we go back to the basics? Honestly, that's really what makes people go, break through the glass ceiling. And really think about the one exercise I did that changed everything for me was I thought about everything I hated doing and I never wanted to do again. And then I thought about all the things I really love doing and I have passion for. So then all the things outside that circle, I was like, who can do it? Can I use technology or AI, or can I delegate it, or can I just say no to it? And that changed everything, because then I had passion and energy again, which passed down to the team. Because if you're the grumpiest person in the room, everyone else is going to be grumpy, and no one wants to work for a grumpy company. So other than the Grinch.
Yeah, that's good stuff. It reminds me, in the early days of my agency, and there was years of just struggle and trying to figure things out. And I'd come from another business that I'd grown and successfully sold, so a lot of it was ego coming in. Right, I was like, I know how to do this. It's going to be easy. I'm going to do this. But what I learned in hindsight, is always easier to see this in hindsight, is that as you're talking about these companies, as we go through different stages of growth, sometimes if we pull advice from a company that's way ahead of us in another stage, in other words, maybe they're in the 2 to 7 million range, and we're trying to apply that when we're at 300,000, like it's the wrong strategy at the wrong time. Yep. And so for me, I did that over and over again. I was looking out there and I was seeing, the quote unquote gurus out there that were talking about, oh, you've got to be doing X, Y, or Z. And I would attempt to apply that. and it would end up being a disaster. And I'm like, I'm doing exactly what they're saying to do. Why is this? And so in hindsight, I can easily see I was taking a great strategy that would be great for us at a different time, at a different level, but I was attempting to put it in a company that wasn't ready for that.
Yeah, someone told me everything big starts off small, and success leaves clues. And you can't do what the bigger guys are doing, but you can look at what did they do in order to get there. And that's where people are messing up. It's like I would look at what is the $100 million agency doing, and then I would try to do that rather than what did they do when they tried to go from 2 to 3, and then I could actually make it all work. So, well, Wayne, this has all been amazing. What's the agency website people can go and check you guys out?
Sure. It's just uglymugmarketing.com. All our info's there.
I love that name. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. And for all of you guys listening, if you guys want to turn your agency burden into an asset where it's producing predictability, wealth, freedom, I want all of you to go check out agencymastery360.com. This is our entire new brand for helping agency owners really scale up in a couple different ways, from attract, convert, and scale, so you can actually have the opportunity to sell one day. So go to agencymastery360.com. And until next time, have a swank day.